On mute as well.
Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. We are here a little bit early. So don't panic if you're not here yet. You've got time. You've got time to come back and join us. We just thought we'd come and say hello before the session.
So just so that I can see, maybe someone can put something in the chat and I can see if I can see the chat, because I plan on using it during the session if I can. Yay.
Oh, and here we go. Lena as well. Nice to have you with us. Hello.
Hello, Lynette. Look, there we go, up on the screen as well. Hello,
Ah,
Laura.
and some more. I'm not going to put you all on the screen.
Okay.
Sorry, there's more of you coming in now. We can't. Yep, Laura, we can see your message.
So I will
Fantastic.
do my best during the talk to try and look out for the chat and see if there's anything coming in. But if you notice anything, Tom, just let me know and interrupt me, because I'll take stuff as I go. So,
Smashing, yeah. Well, so there we are, people. There's an open invitation to interrupt. If there's one
yep.
thing people in L&D can do, it's interrupt with questions. We all know that.
If we don't make it to the end, we don't make it to the end. It's okay. And is there someone on straight afterwards? I can't remember. Or is this?
The next session starts at 5:45. So we've got some flex. Worst case scenario, if we get festooned with questions, there's some flex space.
We shall see how we go.
Cool. So let me introduce David. David's got I think a really interesting session planned for us ahead. It's got one of those terms. It's machine learning, which I always get very interested about this, because I think sometimes when you hear it, generally on marketing websites, you read it with no explanation of what it is, does, or what relevance it has here. But I know that's not the session we're having today. We're actually gonna look at some of the practicalities of it. So I will, basically I'll stop waffling. I'll get the heck off the screen and hand over the reins to David now.
Okay, and I think I'm going to disappear as well and just go for slides instead. Following what Richard Mayer says, I've got rid of me, get rid of the presenter. Let's just have this. So hopefully we are pretty much on time. I'll just start now. Introductions, doesn't matter if someone misses them. So I am David. I am an instructional designer in global learning at Takeda. As you can probably guess, I'm from the UK, I'm from London, but I now live in Zurich in Switzerland. I've been in digital learning and learning for about 20 years. I ran my own company in London for quite a while, then spent 6 years in Australia, and now I work creating global learning projects and developing standards, and I run a community of instructional designers across Takeda's manufacturing sites as well. During the session, in the chat, or in fact, now let's find out where you are, because I can see quite a few people on, some that I know, some that I don't. In the chat quickly, pop your name, where you are, and the number of years you've had designing learning. So I'll put mine in. Let's see how long other people have been doing this for. You're not going to get away with doing nothing in this session. Yeah, you have to be awake. Oh, there we go. Oh, we have someone from Iran here. Cool. Stockholm, Michigan, North Carolina, Poland, Delaware, a place I've been, Columbus, Ohio, another place I've been. Yeah. Excellent. So we've got a mix of definitely people from places, and from complete new beginner, which is perfect, to people who've been doing this for 20 years, and they can tell me stuff. Oh, Bahamas. I think I need a project with you, Sajin. I can come out and I'm sure I can help with something in the Bahamas. I'm sure. So to start with, I thought it might be useful to have a little background about the project that I'm going to show you. I work at Takeda. Most of you probably never heard of Takeda. And Takeda is a global values-based R&D driven biopharmaceutical leader. We're headquartered in Japan with regional hubs in Boston and in Zurich. The company is committed to discover and deliver life-transforming treatments. It's a pharmaceutical company, and we're guided by a real commitment to patients, our people, and the planet. And you hear those pillars of patient, people, and planet a lot in the company. And I know you hear this guff sometimes, but it actually does really guide what people do down. And you'll see some of that when I talk about why we were doing things. Takeda is probably one of the biggest companies most of you have never heard of. Uh, it's a pharmaceutical company, 3.2 trillion yen turnover, which is about $27.7 billion. So it's a big one. It's the 10th biggest pharmaceutical company in the world by 2020's sales. So it's a big company with lots of activities in lots of countries, from Switzerland to India to USA to Japan. All the little dots on the map here are manufacturing sites. We've got a presence in 80 countries, that is sales and marketing, etc., but 30 plus sites doing manufacturing around the world. So there's a lot going on. I work in global manufacturing, and there's about 13,500 staff, give or take, in manufacturing, mainly at those 30 odd sites that we have. But the way that manufacturing works in pharmaceuticals, we also have global quality, GQ. So there are 13,500 in manufacturing and another 4 and a bit thousand in quality. And what the quality people essentially do is check that we are following what we're meant to do. So the research and development and the clinical people will figure out how to make a drug, then manufacturing has to make it, but quality will make sure that we're following the procedures and that what's being made is what it is. So there's a lot of checking if you look at those numbers. And this makes for a very diverse and very international group of people. English is our business language, but lots of the workers at the manufacturing sites might only speak their local language. It depends on what sort of level and what you're doing in the company. And we have to cope with everyone, really. So I've got a little video to show you, which I've pre-recorded. I'm cheating. Someone will have to put in the chat if the audio doesn't work from it, but it should do. I think I remembered to check the box. And we're not looking at the learning design for this. We're just thinking purely of the translation process. But I thought a little background and a project to show you the life cycle might help us along the way. So I'll just play this.
Every year, we have to deliver a compliance training project to make sure that everyone is up to speed with our regulatory requirements and updated on current issues and trends. This focuses on regulatory changes and areas of risk for the company. This is called the Annual Good Manufacturing Practices Training, or AGMP for short. Here's a copy of it. As you can see, it's just a RISE course that uses the built-in content blocks and types. As well as static text and images, we have some interactions, but nothing too fancy. We made the e-learning a little more interactive this year, getting people to practice what they're doing, and challenge them to reflect on things, rather than just telling them stuff. You can see that we had to build a few diagrams and graphics. We built graphics like these with the idea that they'd be reused in other places and edited by other people. So, we built them in PowerPoint, exported them, and imported them here in RISE. For some topics, users have to practice and do little simulations. Here's an example of a conversation where users choose how to explain some key concepts back to a fictional friend. People are being challenged to update their understanding of GMP principles and to apply them in a way similar to real life. The training goes out to the entire global audience. I just wanted to give you an idea of what the course is and the sort of content it contains.
Okay, so this is the scenario that we've got an annual course created in Rise, as you saw, nothing particularly fancy. It is quite interactive, though. Lots of reflection questions, scenarios for people to do and things. There's a few bits of custom graphics and things that we couldn't make in Rise, so we made them externally and imported them in. There is no audio or video in the course this time, which was deliberate because we knew it was going to have to be translated. The audience, 17,500 people, so it has to be good and it has to be effective because that's around $2 million worth of people's time, which is quite a lot of money. The company as a whole has a big focus at the moment on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that aligns to that our people pillar of the people, patient, planet. And it's not something where just lip service is being given to it, but they're really looking at how to make things better for existing employees and how to make it fairer as we go forwards, both for patients and for employees. So a logical thought is that local language versions of any course should be better than English. And that should help enable diversity in some ways by improving equity and particularly inclusion, because if you have it in your language, it's much easier to access it. And this is something that everyone has to do. So it's a prerequisite of being able to work at the company. So I thought that if we were doing translation, then let's try and do it efficiently. And I thought we should try and automate what we're doing. I have looked at machine translation a lot. I live in Switzerland. I don't really speak German very well. So I use machine translation all the time just to find out what things are and to occasionally exchange messages with people. I thought we should be able to leverage that and the sort of digital and data approach in doing this translation. And also, if I was doing this now, it was going to have to be done by other people later as well. So I thought, A, this is going to be quite easy to do. And B, it had to be made into a process that was going to be easy for other people to follow later. And to a certain degree, for us at Takeda, it is innovation doing this. So I thought I'd follow a fairly normal innovation path of explore what the options were, experiment a bit, and then only then do the implement and figure out whether it all worked. And for the explore bit, I was quite lucky because we actually have an innovation group that's really open, and I join in their meetings anyway to see what the rest of the business is doing. And through that group, Takeda X, I found that there was a translation project in very early stages. And thankfully, the colleague on that, Roseanne, was really collaborative and cooperative and just led us into the whole thing and said, you know, as long as we don't complain if it all goes wrong, we were very welcome to be pilot users, etc. So I experimented with it a little bit before doing anything with some colleagues who speak German because it was easy to access them, and realized that we were going to have to do some things to start with, like make a glossary. And what I want to do now is to show you the process that I went through with Rise to do the translation. So before I do that, has anyone got any questions they want to ask now about the problem we're trying to address and the way it was being addressed? I can't see anything coming in, and I'm going to take silence as a good measure at the moment. So I will carry on. So this is the process that we followed, given hindsight. There were a few minor hiccups along the way, as there always are the first time you do something. And I'm going to walk you through each of the steps based around doing it in Articulate Rise. And the first set of steps here are really preparation, getting things ready. The thing that we realized slightly later was that you really need to decide your languages and to find the human reviewers right at the start. Machine translation is good, but it's not perfect. So as I said, I rely on Google Translate every day, but I'm kind of more willing to let some of its craziness go than someone might be in a business situation. So you still need some native level speakers to help out. And it's definitely best to line them up at the start and set expectations of the sort of work they're going to have to do and the timeframes they're going to have to do it with. And you need them to do a bit of legwork to kick off the whole translation process, because it all starts with this translation glossary. The initial bit is an English language document where we trawled through the materials for things that we thought might need to be translated in specific ways that are unique to the pharmaceutical industry or unique to Takeda and things, and just gave some notes to point people where they are. And we sent this out to the reviewers and got them to put in the local language equivalents. And different languages deal with different terms in different ways. So the French one, for example, they weren't translating this term Alcoa Plus, even though the first one is A, accurate, and they use E, exit. So in another language, they might change the Alcoa abbreviation, or they might not even change something that says accurate. They might leave that in English for their language, and there's no rhyme or reason to these things. So this sets up some literal translations that will go on with technical terms, etc. This means that your language reviewers, your helpers, they need not only sort of native level language, but they also need some domain knowledge. They need to know what these things actually are. You can't just find anyone who happens to speak the language. The next step, once you've done that prep, is to actually get the course translated. And I made lots of mistakes doing my first translations in the experiment and learned from these. So whatever you do, if you have to do this, give yourself some room to make a few mistakes first time. Like with Rise, it's really important that you clone the course before doing exports and things, and you end up with one course copy per language as you export them, which we'll see. So what I've got is a video demo that I've pre-recorded that shows you how this works. And again, this has got voiceover, so I'll just let it play and then we can have any questions after this. So here we are in Rise, and we'll start by making a copy of this course. It's very important that you do make a copy to start with. I made that mistake when I was doing experiments and things, but let's add onto the end the fact that this is going to be the French version of the course. And it will appear here, and then we open that up, and we'll just let the course load, and we need to export the XLIF file. So in here, you see at the top, under settings, not under export, in translations, it says step 1, duplicate the course, which we've done. Now I need to export the XLIF file, which is an XML interchange file format. So once I've done that, I can then pass that into the translation engine. So that first step, getting the export from Rise is really pretty simple. And that XML language in interchange file format is a very standard format used in the translation industry and in the IT industry. So a lot of tools support it, but you could do this by exporting it to Word and having a table and using a column. There are lots of different ways. This is just the way it works inside Rise. So from that, has anyone else used XLIF files before I move on to the translation? Or maybe you're wondering how this might work with any other tools. I see we've got a comment about Trint, which I've not come across Trint, so maybe Matt can put something in there about what Trint is or a link to it for people to look afterwards, look later. But what tools are people looking at translating from? Because I imagine there's some Lectora users out there, Storyline users. And it's all a fairly similar process that basically you export the course content, but you want to export it in a tagged manner. Okay, we're quiet on the chat, so I'll carry on and show you how the actual translation worked, the next little step. And again, it's a pre-recorded bit. The export is done, and we've got the glossary ready from before. And this just shows you how they come together in the translation, which is super, super simple. Next, we have to do the actual translation. Here, I've uploaded already into SharePoint my comma-separated value version of the French glossary and that copy that I made, the XLIF file from Rise. And our IT team have integrated the Microsoft translation tool into SharePoint for us. So I just select the XLIF file, I go to my little menu up here and just select translate, and I can select my source language as English. I don't really need to do that, but I always like to anyway. My target language, you can see we've got a whole bunch here. We have to do them one by one because of that issue with having one source file for each language. Now, we do have a standard glossary here, which we didn't have when I first did these, which has got a whole bunch of general pharmaceutical terms and Takeda terms. And I'll also add the glossary that we had previously done. You just find that, and there it is. So I add that as well. Custom translation engines we don't use, and it's as simple as just pressing translate document. And off it goes. There we go. It's got it into the queue. It's actually translating it. And there we go. It has done the translation. Close that, and I will just, there it has appeared for me. And we see FR at the end. And the next step is just to download that back to my computer. And the next step is just to download that back down to my computer. I'll just save it there. And voila, as they say in France, we have a translated document. So now, on these sort of 10 steps, we've got this file. We have a translated course file, and it's time to get the translated course and get it ready for sign off. And again, I've got a pre-recorded demo. But before I go there, does anyone have any questions about that so far? That what I was doing there with creating the translated course file? And I mean, if you're following along, a simple yes or no in the chat. Do you think it's something you could do so far from what you've seen? Someone has to answer me. I need to know there's a yes or a no in there. Hey. Anyone else out there? Is there anyone who doesn't think they could follow that so far? Excellent. We have people saying yes. This is good. So let's have a look and see it coming back into Rise. Now we switch back to. Oh, the sound is a bit low on this. I'm sorry. The course that we duplicated with that little FR tag on the end. Mine is the French one. And back in the settings, we continue with the translations workflow by importing translated text. I just have to select that FR, the name on the end of it again, and import that. And off it goes, uploading it, done. Close that, and look, we have a course in French. There are always a few issues with this, but generally it does a pretty good job. Now, one thing that obviously needs doing in some of this is that the graphics have not been translated. So we've got some images like this one that has words which may translate, may not translate, but it depends on the language. And those need to come across. The actual content they go to has been translated. So those can be processed separately by the translation engine in SharePoint. And we deliberately built them in PowerPoint so that they would flow through that automatically. If you've used one of the Adobe products, then you'll have to export the text, copy and paste it all into a notepad file or something, translate that file, and then manually copy and paste it back in the right places, which is something I wanted to avoid. So that was the next step, as we had to do those and switch all the graphics out manually. Okay, I know that the audio on that was really low. I don't know why it didn't normalize it like the others, but what I was showing there was basically the import of the French, which just handles so easily. It even leaves all your highlights and things and stuff. But the big issue is text in graphics. So we'd built the graphics in PowerPoint partly because we wanted to share them for the people to use them in the other materials anyway. And most people know how to edit PowerPoint, even though it's not the best graphics tool. And what we had to do was to process the PowerPoint files through the same translation engine, because it's a Microsoft one that we're using. It handles all the Microsoft file formats, and then manually import those graphics to the different language version ones so that any text in graphics changed. So what we've got to now is a machine translated course, which I think is pretty impressive. But the translation is good, but it's really not perfect. And you do need human input to polish it up. And you really can't skip this stage, much as I would love to. So you still need a native language checker to check speakers to check things. And ideally that's the person who put that glossary together for you at the beginning, and that they are expecting this to come their way. Now, there are two ways to do this with Rise. And depending on the tool that you're using, there may be different ways. But we piloted the two different ways in the experiment phase and decided on a solution. So with Rise access, there's different advantages and disadvantages. Giving people access to Rise means that they can as the reviewer, make the changes directly, which makes it much easier for the instructional designer or the developer, because you're not becoming the bottleneck. And it also means there's a single pass on most reviews, because the language checker is making those directly. The disadvantages are that there is a bit of a learning curve, that the reviewer has to learn a little bit about Rise, but we just made some material to help them in a one-page cheat sheet that they could refer to. You've got to make backups of what you're doing, which Rise isn't particularly good at. Some other tools are a bit better, because the reviewers really can mess things up. And obviously there are license cost issues. It wasn't an issue for us because we had a whole bunch of licenses, and we could let people go. The other way is using a review tool, and there's the Articulate Review 360 tool. Big advantage is you don't have to buy licenses for the reviewers, and it's also really easy to use. They're locked just to making comments, so they can't make any changes to the course. And there were a couple of people who deleted things by accident that we had to go and find backups and put stuff back. These things happen, and it was their first go doing it as well. There are some disadvantages to the review tool though, which is it can be really tricky to figure out the comments, because people don't necessarily just say change this to that. They put other comments in there, and you might not speak the language that you're editing. You might not even recognize the character set particularly well, as you'll see. There can be errors of text getting misplaced and things that are really quick to change if you're doing it yourself, and really hard to describe to other people. And the ideal developer can become a bottleneck, because you get these all out for review in one go, and they're all coming back in pretty quickly at the same time, and someone has to do all the changes and interpret them and manage it and track it and everything, rather than it being done by the individuals. So we went the Rise access route, having experimented first to see whether people could cope with it, and it did work pretty smoothly. There were 2 instances where we had to put some content back that someone had accidentally deleted, but it wasn't a big drama. Worse things have happened. The other one that we found with the review tool, because we were trying to edit something we didn't really understand, is we needed multiple revision rounds. And actually getting hold of the reviewers was hard to get them back in to do it a second time or anything. And just to give you an idea of some of the sorts of mistakes and things that pop up, word order and highlighting is a big one. So there's an English example on the left here where you can see highlighting on different words. And in German, it just becomes one big highlighted block, which really loses the power. But that shouldn't actually be that way. It's just the way that the HTML tags and where words have ended up. So things like that need editing. And that's something that's so quick for a reviewer to do themselves and so laborious to explain to you, that was one of the reasons we did it this way. And there's another example here. So We just wanted everyone highlighted, but because again of the highlighting, you end up with it changing. So you need to train the reviewers just to fix a few little things like that. And again, this is another reason it's important that those reviewers have local language skills and some domain knowledge. So choose them wisely and treat them really nicely, because you really, really, really do have to review. And I thought I could share something about the accuracy as well, because as I said, it's good, but it's not perfect, and you do still need those local language reviewers, and you really cannot skip it. I'll just put this all up in one go. So the languages that worked well: Italian, French, Portuguese, Spanish, all Latin-based languages. They worked absolutely brilliantly. People were going through and making all the changes in the course. It would have taken them 2 days at least to translate it, and instead they were reviewing it and getting it back in 2 hours for those languages. So it saved masses of time for them. Uh, Japanese was a real surprise and actually quite important for us, but it worked really well in Japanese, and I was quite surprised with that. So the Japanese reviewers found it really easy as well. But some languages did take a bit more time and effort. German, word order in German is very, very important, and the order can change what the subject and the object is, with the words remaining exactly the same. And some errors did come in with that. And unsurprisingly, going to Mandarin Chinese as well, the Han version of that, there were more edits to be made in there, and in Russian. So it's possibly languages that, well, Russian and German, I imagine Microsoft don't have as much demand for, and probably don't receive as much love and attention, and aren't based on the same roots as these ones that were easier to do. So people were still saving 60 to 75% of the time compared to doing a manual translation. And they said that these ones, in fact, the top ones, were probably less edits than they were getting from translation agencies. The lower ones here were probably about the same level of edits they were having to make when these came through a translation agency. It did really struggle on a couple of languages. It really struggled on Norwegian for some reason. I don't know whether the Norwegian reviewers were just being super critical, or whether it was really harder, because I really know nothing about Norwegian at all. And one that was really interesting was Hindi. We have a lot of people in a factory in Vashi in India, near Mumbai, and quite a few of those people don't speak great English, particularly the more manual the work they're doing. And part of the problem with Hindi was that there are some things that are concepts that don't really have a neat word in Hindi, but what we might use as one word, they have to explain as a couple of sentences. So that really probably needed localization more than translation. And the time saving on these was questionable, to be honest. Between all of them, the language reviewers estimated 2 to 4 days to manually translate the course. One said it took them a week last year. So we were saving large amounts of time. Now, I'd quite like to know from people, do you think those savings are surprising or disappointing or okay? Would you expect more from this? Or has anyone done this and found even better or even worse results? You have to hit me in the chat. You have to put something in. Is anyone going to tell me if they've had a higher or a lower response? Or whether you have any questions about the accuracy or the process of putting it? So that's Chris. Yeah, I assumed quite a lot of people here wouldn't be doing this, and this would be a good reason to be here. So I was pretty impressed with it. at the beginning, I mentioned the global quality people. So at the moment, we've got a course that's been machine translated and it's had human review. To us, that's almost ready for release. But we have to send it to the GQ people to check, and that went really, really well. The human reviewers had done stuff. When the GQ people got it, they found very few errors, typos, or anything that needed modification, which was better than the results that had been seen before when it had been working with language agencies and reviewers. So that was very interesting, that possibly getting the reviewers to do the direct edits actually got more corrections made as it went on, and actually improved the quality of the product as well, which is something I care about. So the results of the whole thing was the annual GMP course in 10 languages. And doing that, I mean, if you get the course and it's in Japanese or it's in Hindi, then it should help to improve inclusion and equity for the workforce. Uh, we estimate the total translation effort was reduced by about 75%. We probably wouldn't do Hindi in future, and we might be able to improve that slightly because we've got the experience of doing this. And it was really good fun collaborating with the IT colleagues because they were rolling this out. We were actually using it in a very slightly different way to how I've showed you. We've now integrated it into SharePoint and into tools in the company, so you can do it really quickly and easily. And we've got a process for future products, future projects as part of this. And in the future, all this feeds back into those sort of company pillars of the patient, people, and planet. The patient, because we'll have reduced costs on doing this, and that leaves money for more productive activities that give better results for patients at the end of the day. So we get a little win there. For people, because we've got better access to local language materials, which should increase our potential for diversity and inclusion. And let's face it, it's always nice to get things in your local language. I appreciate that in Switzerland, where I don't speak any of the 4 languages. And planet, because we've all been forced into this COVID world, but in the future, this should help reduce travel requirements because people were translating and doing stuff as live local sessions sometimes with people traveling in for them because it was too difficult to get the e-learning translated, and it was easier just to do a local session and get people to travel. So we are hopefully going to reduce some other things as we go. And a really good result was the workforce liked it. We actually had unsolicited positive feedback about compliance training, which we don't always get. So the fact that people actually appreciated the effort and enjoyed the learning and thought it was more of a challenge than lots of other things, and it was nicer to get it in their language, was a good result for us. And I see the Norwegian machine was pining for the fjords. It was with Slati Bartfast, maybe. Yes. So I can take some questions now, or I can move on and look at some other things that we're looking at for the future. What would people like? In the chat, put move on or put a question. Once I've had a few of them, I will do whatever you're after. But I need you to put something in the chat. Actually, Tom, how many people have we got on? I don't see the people count on here.
Hello. We've got 70 folks still with us at the moment.
Okay. Someone have to put something in the chat then. Or should I just move on? Move on. Okay.
We've got some
cool.
move-ons coming in.
Excellent. Okay, I shall go and move on.
Bye.
So, thinking of the future, this is the existing flow, going from the original source document with the glossary through machine translation, human review to a translated version. We've all seen that. But what if we could do some nice feedback and really bring the machine learning in? The engine that we're using is capable of this, but there are extra costs to it and extra efforts. It would be really good, though, that if when we had the original and the machine translated version, you gave it the translated version and it learned from your corrections. That is completely doable, and we are experimenting with it. The other thing is that we have a lot of historical documents. We have loads of stuff that's been translated over the last 10 years that we've got copies of, whether that's training documents, whether that's other PowerPoints, trainer guides, all sorts of things. So we can take the historical originals and those manual translations and build a machine language model. It uses machine learning and those historical ones to actually come up with its own model. You need a lot of examples for it to work, is what the initial investigations were that. When I say a lot, we're talking 10,000 examples for it to really start working. So it's something we would like to do, but you've also got to be sure that what you're feeding it is good, is really good quality, or else it will just learn how to do bad translation. It may even change some good translation into bad translation. So there are those barriers to doing this that we would really like to do, and that's the size of the data sets, the cost to train and use. With the Microsoft one, we are looking at maybe 4 times the cost to run it than to run the normal one. And there's also some energy implications of the extra intensive processing and stuff that goes into this. I don't think it's a big issue, but someone did call me out on it and said I should go and look at it and check it before we go further. I'd love to know if anyone has got any experience of doing this, because I've tried it with some non-language things doing the machine learning, and it's been important. That's a nice comment from Jonathan there about being stunned that we got appreciative comments on a GMP training. We were very happy to get them, I can tell you. So this is one way of doing things. I'm not seeing much on the chat, so I'm just going to move on and say there's a 10-step process you can think about and following. Getting the languages right, creating those glossaries, almost all the translation tools. It doesn't matter whether you're using the Microsoft one or the professional version of something like DeepL, they work on those glossaries. You get your people in already at the beginning and make copies of your course for each language. Exporting, it doesn't, I was using XLIF, but it could be Word in a table and translate table and paste it back in. It could be an Excel file. We could have done it that way. Or we were actually feeding PowerPoint files and things like that directly to it as well. So it's just getting your things out, running them through the glossary, and then replacing graphics with translated text as well. If you're using the Adobe tools, that becomes a bit more complicated because they don't, as far as I'm aware, they don't export the text and let you do it. It's a sort of very manual process, and we have to do it to get there. We have to do that independent review at the end just to test it and sign off and make sure we've not done anything. I can quickly do a little future gazing as well, because I'm sure there are other things people can imagine doing. What we had a mention of video, and I actually got a request from a colleague that was a video request that came in. They had a video that was of a screen cam on how to use DocuSign. And I don't know if you remember at the beginning of this whole thing, there was a female voice on the first video. That was actually an AI text-to-speech thing. It wasn't a real person. I don't know if you noticed at the time. So I'll quickly show you what we did with a video one. I don't actually have the video to show you, but I have the whole process. And I'll just press play on a pre-recorded one again. So here is another way that I've been using the translation engine. This time I was given a video in English by a colleague and asked if we could make it international. And it was a screen cam video. So I thought about it. So yeah, I think we can give it a go. First step was we took the video and ran it through a transcription engine so that we got the English transcription, which you can see here has a few errors in it. So that had to be tidied up by hand so that we had the right words. So that was the first bit of AI-based stuff was the transcription engine. Then, unsurprisingly, we took the text file here and just put it through the translation engine using a standard glossary that had been developed, and bingo, we had the same document in French for a voiceover. That then did the usual thing of it went for human review, and someone went through it and corrected everything, and then we had to turn it into a voiceover. So what I used for that was a little tool called Murph. Murph is an AI-based voice synthesis platform, text to speech, but it produces voices of amazingly good quality. So I loaded the text file into here, and hey presto,
Bienvenue dans la formation d'Akisyn GXP. Dans cette formation, nous présenterons d'Akisyn, nous parlerons des différentes
can hear,
significations formes des signatures et nous couvrirons quelques sujets qu'il est
have
important de comprendre avant de commencer.
a voiceover in French with no human intervention. So we automated the English voice to text using AI. We've gone from English text to French text using AI. We've reviewed that manually. We've then brought it in. And of course, there were a few problems with the pronunciation of things like docucitien, which we can correct in here and actually make it into what we want it to sound like. And
D'Akisyn.
so we can make it say all the things that we want it to say with the right accent. So I had to review these voiceovers with local language specialists. Actually, they reviewed them offline, highlighted what needed changing, and then we fixed them together live in a screen sharing session. And that went back and became the audio for the whole video.
Bienvenue dans la formation d'Akisyn GXP. Dans cette formation, nous
So it is amazing what we can do with these things. But there's even more coming, I think. I'm looking at platforms like Synthesia, which does AI-based character generation. So here, that's not a real person speaking, that is an artificial person. So we should be able to go from talking head or presenter in English through transcription, translation, audio generation, and then syncing up with an actual synthesized presenter to be able to give training in lots of different languages without having to have people who speak them available for video recording, which would be quite a big win for some things. Anyway, it gives us an idea of where we might go in the future. So that has been our whirlwind look at how we used machine translation on a project with Rise, hopefully given you some ideas of how you might be able to do it yourself, use it yourself if you are in a big multinational company, or just if you have a client who needs some translation work doing on their projects. A look at how we're using the voiceovers now, so that we're creating voiceovers in English as well as the other languages. We've got that in all the 10 languages that we need from that one platform, which is great. And where we're headed, where we will, for some things, look at doing artificial characters as well in there, just to bring a different little touch to things sometimes. And we're also looking at ways we can do simulated conversations and interactive stuff in different languages, where you could actually have a go at doing interactive video and taking decisions, but having someone react to you rather than just getting text back. You can contact me afterwards. I can hang around here for any other questions. If you are based in Switzerland or currently online, I run a meetup group, and we've got a meetup coming up on the metaverse and learning. But you can have a look at that. I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn. There aren't many David Swaddles in the world. Yeah, and I just want to say a big thank you to Tom for putting today together, because I know how much effort goes into putting things like this together. And a big thank you to those of you who stuck with it and typed in the chat and joined in. I'll have a look in there in a second to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that front, actually, we have got one straight away. Could you post the details for the group in the chat so that people can get a link to your meetup?
Yeah, I can do that. I have to go and find it. Carry on while I do that. I also ran one when I was in Australia. So the Swiss one kind of got hit by COVID. I'm just restarting it because I think we're heading back to doing some face-to-face events hopefully soon.
Exciting stuff.
Okay,
There goes. If anyone's got any questions, go ahead and ask. I think
Max.
I think Jonathan's keeping everyone in the chat entertained.
Good.
Brilliant, and we've got a link there to the there we are, to the meetup. So anyone local.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be online. The next one.
Oh, awesome.
We've actually booked. We've actually had 250 people book up for it already.
Wow.
But join the waiting list because I'm going to encourage anyone who can't make it to drop out. I think I can't face doing more than 250 people. It'll be.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that session. I thought that was really, really interesting.
Very welcome.
It's funny, if it's not something you deal in all the time, you sometimes miss how far the technology has come. I sort of remember sort of when it was really big news when Windows 95 had text to speech, and it was dreadful. But it was huge, and it was gonna revolutionize the world. And then we kind of waited, and it very much didn't. But it feels like this is actually useful now.
I think Articulate Storyline still has the Windows 95 text to speech in it, unfortunately.
To be honest, they could probably take lessons from it. Let's be honest, but yes, it's. I suppose now the question this does raise is, why should we put up with such rubbish ones when such good stuff is out there? You know, this is there's clearly great resources out there. Oh, actually, here's a question just before we wrap up. When you had to supply guidelines to the reviewers, were these guidelines uniform, or were they different based on the localization?
Good question. They were uniform. We gave them really clear messaging that we didn't want them to edit the meaning of the content. We wanted the meaning to stay the same, and they were just reviewing the language, because there is a real temptation often when the reviewer is a subject matter expert for them just to start editing the course. We really had to prevent that from happening. So it was all uniform, and we tried to make it so it was one A4 sheet, so that literally they could print it and have it by the side as to what they were doing, what they weren't, with a checklist in it, so they could just check off that they had done what they were meant to do. And then we made to go with it, just because I can't resist these things, like a 2.5 minute video that actually just showed you how to do it and how to do the highlighting and the color changes and things, but using a video instead. And from the numbers, lots of people looked at the video. I don't know how many people printed stuff because we don't get stats out of PDFs, but from 20 odd reviewers, we had almost 100 views of the instructions, which meant that every time they were going back to do it, they were rechecking, or if they got stuck, they went and looked there rather than contacting me.
I think it's the prime example of just giving people a simple resource that is just, this is how to do the job. No kind of excessive stuff around it, just exactly what they need when they need it. Brilliant.
Like we should be doing with the rest of our learning.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much. Really interesting session. Thank you everyone for being engaged in the chat there as well. Our next session is in just under 10 minutes, and it's our last session for day one. We made it. Huzzah. It's with Heidi Kirby, and it's building a leadership development framework using core values. So I think this is going to be a great session, and I shall see you all there.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.